Where to begin? Where to begin? Okay, so 2 days ago or 3 days ago, Kamala was asked again about her Black heritage, and suddenly she is getting a little iffy on the details. You can see she does not want to engage in the conversation, and the answer that she actually gives is fantastic. It is just fantastic, and we need to now pick it apart. So she appeared on a show called All the Smoke, and she was interviewed by the hosts, which are former NBA players Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson. I want you to pay very close attention to her answer here. Take a listen.
What do you think when you hear people kind of questioning just the fabric of who you are?
Well, one, I don't listen to it. Okay. I'm really clear about who I am, and if anybody else is not, they need to go through their own level of therapy. That's not my issue.
Their issues, right?
My mother was very clear. She was raising two Black girls to be two proud Black women, and it was never a question. You know, it's funny because over the years, journalists, some, not most, will want to talk about it. And I say, okay, if you want to have this conversation, I'm prepared to have it, but sit down and get comfortable for a few hours. If you want to start talking about race in America, you want to talk about the 1/8 rule?
A drop.
Right. You want to talk about what it means in terms of who you are perceived to be and the impact that can have on the rest of your life, regardless of who you actually are in terms of your God-given capacity and the rights that you have and should have. So, you know, I don't mess with that. I think that's other people trying to figure some stuff out that they
got some issues.
They got to deal with it.
Wow. So she just doesn't answer the question at all. Right. So before we had her really leaning into being Black. Now all of a sudden she doesn't even mess with that. I don't mess with that. I don't even mess with that. They need to go to therapy. She's pulling this Freudian technique. Obviously, you know, I've spoken to you about Freud, who was a disgusting human being who essentially gaslit women who were actually being abused by their fathers. So what she's doing is this exact same Freudian technique of gaslighting people by being like, actually, you need therapy. The problem is you. The problem is actually you for asking the question. No, Kamala, we're asking the question because you made this a theme in your bookie book, which we're going to get to in a little bit, okay? So you don't get to now just not address the question whatsoever. Put yourself in her shoes, okay? I'm going to put myself in her shoes. I'm running for president of the United States, okay? And these questions keep popping up about whether or not I am Black. Do you know how simple it would be to simply answer the question? List your Black relatives in 4 seconds. I would be like, this is my grandma. This is my grandpa. Suddenly she's a little iffy on the details here. Why didn't she just say, yes, obviously my grandmother is Beryl. Here's a picture of her. She's Black. I'm disgusted with the people that are even calling this into question. Here's my great grandmother, Iris Finnegan. I am obviously Black. Instead, she goes, oh, do you really want to talk about it? That's what I say. They show us, do you really want to talk about race? Do you really want to talk about the 1/8 rule? I mean, how dare she? And the answer is yes, Kamala. Actually, I would like to talk about it. Yeah, I'm actually totally up for talking about the 1-drop rule, the 1/8 rule. Let's discuss history. That's what those journalists should have done. That's what those former NBA players should have done, not given her a free pass. I would have been like, no, ma'am, name your ancestors. And why are you bringing up the 1/8 rule at all? Let's talk about the history here, okay? The 1-drop rule was actually a legal doctrine in the United States that was used as a means of racial classification, okay? It really dates back to the antebellum period in Virginia, where people of color were considered legally white if they had less than 25% African ancestry. So we're talking about something that was pre-Civil War, but then the classifications became especially relevant throughout Jim Crow in the South, obviously because of segregation. So they're like, are you white or are you Black? So they needed to know how to quantify whiteness and Blackness. The laws were first officially codified in Tennessee as one of Virginia's racial integrity laws. They wanted birth certificates to just be very clear whether a parent was legally white or legally a Negro, so that it was known which laws in society you had to abide by. What about Indian Americans? Because strangely, she brings up her mom. You would think the first thing she would do would be to bring up her dad. Instead, she brings up her mom. She's like, my mom was very clear that she was raising 2 Black women. Your mother is Indian, like fully 100% Indian. So the fact that the first person that you recall is a non-Black person is suspicious. And regarding Indian Americans, just to be clear, in 1923, the Supreme Court decided in the United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind that Indians were classified as Caucasians, as they had been by anthropologists. They upheld that, but they also made it clear that they were not considered white. So that is probably the answer as to why her mother put Caucasian on her birth certificate. That was actually the legal classification for Indian women. Now, also regarding this one-drop rule, Kamala Harris was never subject to it ever in her entire lifetime. She was born in California. Just to be clear, that was the very first state to end segregation, and they did that back in 1947. So they did it 7 years before the Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Education, which federalized desegregating all of the schools. So it actually infuriates me that she does this, that she essentially goes back and pretends that she's lived through something. Like, well, let's talk about the one-drop rule. Why are we discussing the one-drop rule? By the way, even if you were subjected to it, you probably would have passed, since none of your parents are listed as Negroes on your birth certificate. Like, what are you doing mining the history of Black people that came before you and who you are still refusing to name? You put them in a book once, but that was it. Now you don't want to talk about Grandma Beryl. What's up with that? Now you don't want to talk about great grandma Iris Finnegan. What is